Hi, I'm Michael Wargo, team pilot with Precision Aerobatics. Today we're going to learn a little bit about hovering to make them look a little better, and that is we're going to learn how to bring them down a little lower. I've had so many pilots that have had a lot of trepidations about bringing it down low because of risk to the plane and so on and so forth. Above everything, I suggest always trying this stuff with a little foamy or something. But this is a Precision Aerobatics Katana 52, one of my favorite planes, and it's very easy to hover, very easy to Harrier, and it's going to be really easy for me to show you how to do it with this aircraft. So what we're going to do is we're going to try and teach you to stop flying the plane level and just turning the nose up and then catching it. That is mistake number one. What we want to do is transition from a Harrier. That's the goal. We're going to learn how to not just transition from a Harrier slowly, but I'm also going to give you a few other options for getting into a hover that are kind of novel and a little bit nicer for those of you who are a little bit better at it or want to advance. So here we go. Okay, the first thing I want to do is show you why you do not want to just pull the elevator up to vertical. Even going nice and slow like that, when you pull back, you see all that momentum going up? This is what happens all the time. So look how high I am, and it's really unnecessary. In order to get to a hover, really what happens is you should stop the airplane first, which for me is always done in a Harrier. So like we've done in all the previous Harrier videos, is get the plane into a Harrier. Now once I have the plane in this condition, once I have it like this, I can very slowly and deliberately slow it down until it's almost stopped, and then you hear me just adding throttle, and the plane didn't rise at all. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking to fly around in a Harrier very low, and instead of adding throttle as we go nose up, either add none or just a little bit until you see it start to fall. There you go. And as you can hear, I didn't add very much throttle. I'm going to try and do it a little closer to the camera so you can hear. But watch what we're doing. We're starting low, just like this. And you can't do this unless you learn how to do this. We got some wind really throwing this plane around. But here we are. You hear what I'm doing with the throttle? And right at that critical point, we're just adding enough. Now, my recommendation is start up, I don't know, maybe this high. And now your goal is just to not climb. Forget about being low. Just don't climb. So all I'm going to do is stop there, start adding throttle, and keep adding it, but don't overdo it. One of the biggest keys with hovering is just relaxing. Everybody's very quick to protect it from the ground, so they just add too much throttle, and that's just the most common problem. This is really where the rubber meets the road. It really starts where the wings are kind of holding up the aircraft when you're harrying. And when you begin to start to do it, there's quite a steep transition to power, but it's not as steep as you might think. And then once you completely transition from no flying at all to completely hanging on the prop, that's the part where most people just add too much power, or they just cannot get that transition. But I believe firmly that if you kind of master this little area, you'll never have any trouble hovering down low, because it is just not that difficult once you get the hang of the throttle control. My favorite way to get into a hover is to come kind of straight down in a Harrier, because at this point you don't have to fly in a Harrier, you just have to stop it at the ground and reverse its momentum and stand it up. It's really a bit easier than it looks, but you have to be very cognitive of what's going on with your throttle. I have a crosswind and it's throwing the plane around and looking a little unstable, but it's not, it's just a wind. So we're going to go smooth, just add a little bit of throttle, a little bit more, just keep it from falling. Now, I've given advice before that says the key to learning to hover is to think of it not from keeping the plane from falling, but keep it from rising. And that helps you monitor how much throttle. And all that I'm doing is trying to convince everybody not to add too much throttle, because too much throttle does this. You add too much throttle, next thing you know, you're 4 feet up. The only way to stay low is to add throttle gradually and not be too quick on the trigger when adding the throttle. This does sound a bit strange, but the truth is, if you are hovering up high and you lose power, the plane will just fall like a manhole cover. It does not fly out. There is just no time to recover. But hovering low, generally, damage is just limited. All right, here are some really cool options for getting into a hover. Some of my favorites are just that quick flip, come down, and just keep full elevator and turn it right into a hover. That by far is my favorite, or the one I use the most anyway. But you can pretty much come to a hover from just about anywhere. My second favorite, I'm sure, would be to come in from inverted. And as I'm coming in this inverted Harrier, we're doing the same thing. We're just adding throttle a little bit at a time and standing it up. Finally, I love coming in from a knife edge. You watch, we're going to come in from the left here. I'm going to do a knife edge, get that nice high alpha thing going. And then eventually we can stand it up into a hover. It's a little tricky depending on the wind direction and things like that, but it's a really fun maneuver. And the same thing that we can do it that way, we can also do it from, from this maneuver, which is kind of a death slide. We're going to put the plane on its side like this. We're going to come down, we're going to start adding throttle, adding throttle till we get kind of low. Wind is keeping us from standing up very easily. But if I'm right into the wind, it will stand up, and you can stand it up very low. There's something called a wall, which is like this. What you do is you take the throttle completely off when you slam the elevator. Don't add throttle, and that's the key. And then it just kind of stops, and then of course you can catch it with the throttle. But you see what happens when you do it too hard or too early, it'll fly up. And again, what we're trying to avoid is rising. By far, the best way to get into or out of a hover is from a Harrier. And like I said, no matter what happens, on your way down, it is all about throttle control. I'm falling pretty fast, but if I want to fall slow or just to be safe, I just add a little bit more throttle. And as I get lower and lower to the ground, I'm just watching it, flying slower and slower and slower, slower, until at this point, I'm going to start standing it up. I cut the throttle, and now I'm just going to add it back a little bit until eventually it's hovering. I mean, of course it is possible to start high and come down low, but at the very least it is extremely, extremely difficult to do that. And you almost always fall into a bit of a Harrier because, the tail feathers make it very difficult to come down on them like that. Anyway, hovering can be a lot easier than you think. My biggest tip of all is just to relax and not be so afraid the plane is going to fall. You have a lot more time than you think. I'm trying to keep it nice and steady.
No battery.
Okay, obviously the crash was not intended, but it just goes to show you, if you are playing around in the ground low, I don't think anything worse that can happen except it running out of battery right, when it's just above the ground. But the plane fell on the tail, then did a cartwheel, and of course it's perfectly fine, and I can go up and fly it again. So